The desperate scream tore through Valeridge's marketplace like a knife through silk. "Please, don't take my child away." Vivian Holloway knelt in the mud, her once fine dress now soaked at the knees, hands bound behind her back with rough rope that bit into her wrists. Her golden brown hair, normally pinned in a neat bun, had come loose, strands falling across her face, sticking to tear-stained cheeks. Her deep blue eyes, once admired throughout Boston society, now held nothing but raw terror as she watched her 5-year-old daughter being dragged away. "Mama! Mama!" Emma's cries pierced the Saturday morning bustle. The little girl's pale blonde curls bounced as she struggled against the iron grip of Frank Miller, Ezekiel Montgomery's hired muscle. Her tiny silver hairpin, the last gift from her father, clattered to the ground, disappearing into the dust. The marketplace had gone silent. Vendors stopped their calls, horses stamped nervously. The usual cacophony of commerce replaced by the terrible sound of a child being torn from her mother. The crowd formed a perfect circle around the scene, faces showing pity, discomfort, even shame. But no one stepped forward. No one dared. Not when Ezekiel Montgomery stood at the center of it all, immaculate in his tailored suit despite the dust that plagued everyone else, his silver-topped cane tapping methodically against the ground. "According to the contract, Mrs. Holloway," Ezekiel's voice carried across the square, with practiced precision as he tapped his silver-topped cane methodically against the ground, "when you fail to pay your debts, we have the right to seize property of equal value." His cold eyes moved from Vivian to Emma. "Including the child, she's a person, not property." Vivian's voice broke as she struggled against her restraints. Ezekiel adjusted the gold eagle pin on his lapel, a symbol of the bank he controlled and, by extension, the town itself. "The law disagrees, I'm afraid. The child will be sent to a suitable household in Denver. You'll work at my estate to pay off your remaining debt. It's quite generous, really." Through her tears, Vivian saw familiar faces in the crowd, neighbors she'd greeted for years, the butcher who'd sometimes slipped extra scraps for Emma's broth, the seamstress who'd taught her to mend clothes when money grew tight. All looking away now, all pretending not to see. Just 24 hours earlier, Vivian had been sitting at the old piano in her small home, guiding Emma's tiny fingers across the keys, hearing her daughter's delighted laughter at producing her first proper notes. The evening light had streamed through the window, catching the dust motes dancing in the air, creating a moment of perfect peace in their increasingly difficult lives. Then Ezekiel had arrived with his final notice. "I could help you cap this land, Vivian," he'd said, his voice softening in a way that made her skin crawl. "If you would reconsider my proposal." She'd refused his marriage offer again, as she had since Robert's death 3 years ago. Ezekiel's eyes had hardened then, all pretense of kindness vanishing. "Tomorrow at noon, then," he'd said. "I'll collect what's mine." Now, as Emma's sobs grew more frantic, Frank began pulling her toward a waiting carriage. "The train to Denver leaves at 3 o'clock, Ezekiel announced. "Say your goodbyes, Mrs. Holloway. This is the price of defiance." "Someone help us!" Vivian cried out, her voice hoarse. "Please." The only answer was silence and averted gazes. In Valley Ridge, crossing Ezekiel Montgomery meant losing everything: your home, your livelihood, perhaps even your freedom. Better to look away, better to pretend you didn't see. As Frank lifted Emma into the carriage, a deep voice cut through the marketplace noise like thunder through still air. "Stop!" The single word wasn't shouted, it was barely raised above conversational volume. Yet somehow it sliced through Emma's cries, through Vivian's sobs, through the uncomfortable murmurs of the crowd. All heads turned toward the source. Silas Hayes stood at the edge of the gathering, his tall frame casting a long shadow across the packed earth. The crowd parted instinctively as he moved forward, his storm-gray eyes fixed on Ezekiel. His beard was neatly trimmed but streaked with premature silver, matching the small scar near his temple. His clothes were simple but clean, a stark contrast to both Ezekiel's finery and the dusty garments of most townspeople. Whispers rippled through the crowd. The hill man, the hermit, the madman from Whisper Valley. Silas ignored them all, his eyes never leaving Ezekiel as he stepped into the circle. "Mr. Hayes," Ezekiel's voice carried a hint of surprise. "This is an unexpected pleasure. Have you finally decided to rejoin civilization? Silas didn't respond to the taunt. Instead, he reached into his coat and withdrew a leather pouch. The distinctive clink of gold coins silenced the whispers. I'll pay Mrs. Holloway's debt, he said. All of it. Ezekiel's eyebrows rose. You? The crazy hermit from the hill? You have that kind of money? Silas tossed the pouch at Ezekiel's feet. $47 plus interest. The debt is paid. The banker's face tightened as he motioned for Travis Boone, his second man, to retrieve and count the money. After a moment, Travis nodded. It's all here, Mr. Montgomery, plus $5 extra. Ezekiel's jaw clenched. For a moment, it seemed he might refuse, but too many eyes were watching now. Very well, he said finally. Release the child and untie Mrs. Holloway. As Frank reluctantly set Emma down, the little girl ran straight to her mother. Vivian, hands newly freed, caught her daughter in a fierce embrace, burying her face in Emma's curls, breathing in her scent as if to reassure herself this wasn't a dream. Thank you, Vivian whispered, looking up at Silas with tear-filled eyes. Silas nodded once, then turned to Ezekiel. We're done here. For now, Ezekiel replied, his voice dangerously soft, but this isn't over, Hayes. Not by a long shot. He turned to Vivian, his expression a perfect mask of regret. I tried to help you, Vivian. Remember that in the difficult days ahead. With that, he turned on his heel, his men following in his wake as the crowd began to disperse. The drama concluded, commerce resuming as if nothing had happened. Vivian rose shakily to her feet, keeping Emma pressed to her side. How can I repay you? She asked Silas, her voice still unsteady. You can work at my ranch, Silas replied, his voice matter-of-fact. I need help with the house, the garden. Your debt to him is now to me, but I won't take your child. Before Vivian could respond, Emma suddenly doubled over, a small hand clutching at her chest, her breath coming in sharp, painful gasps. Emma! Vivian cried, dropping to her knees beside her daughter. To her surprise, Silas immediately knelt as well, his large hands gentle as he helped Emma sit down. He pressed 2 fingers against the side of her neck, counting silently, his eyes focused with startling intensity. How long has she had the heart condition? He asked, reaching into his pocket and pulling out a small vial. Vivian stared at him in shock. How did you... The blue tinge to her lips, the way she gaps. Answer me, how long? Since birth, Vivian replied. But it's gotten worse this past year. Silas uncorked the vial and carefully measured 3 drops onto a handkerchief. Let her breathe through this, he instructed, holding it near Emma's nose. Slowly now, little one. Emma inhaled, her panic-stricken eyes fixed on the stranger helping her. Gradually, her breathing eased, the terrible gasping subsiding into more regular breaths. There we go, Silas said, his voice gentler than Vivian would have thought possible from the stern-faced man. How did you know what to do? Vivian asked, still holding Emma close. Silas pocketed the vial, his expression shuddering. I know some basic medicine. Living alone in the hills, you learn to take care of yourself. Well, thank you, Vivian said, uncertain what to make of this strange man who had both saved them from Ezekiel and now helped Emma through her attack. My wagon's over there, Silas said, standing and pointing to a well-maintained buckboard at the edge of the square. If you're coming with me, we should go now. Your daughter needs rest. Vivian hesitated, looking around the marketplace. These were her neighbors, people she'd known for years, yet not one had stepped forward to help. Not one had offered a place to stay now that her home was effectively lost to her. We'll come, she said finally, lifting Emma into her arms despite the girl's protest that she could walk. We don't have anywhere else to go. As they made their way to the wagon, Vivian felt the stares of the townspeople, heard their whispers. She'd fallen so far, from the daughter of Judge Holloway to a woman leaving town with the local hermit. Rumored to be touched in the head, she held her chin high nonetheless. Her father had taught her dignity couldn't be taken, only surrendered. And whatever lay ahead at the mysterious Silas Hayes ranch, it had to be better than watching her daughter taken away. As Silas helped them onto the wagon seat, Emma looked up at him with the direct gaze only children can manage. Thank you for helping us, Mr. Hayes, she said solemnly. Something flickered in Silas's gray eyes, surprise, perhaps even a touch of warmth. But it vanished as quickly as it had appeared. You're welcome, little one, he replied. Then, with a flick of the reins, they were moving away from Valley Ridge toward the distant hills where Whisper Valley lay hidden among the pines. Behind them, Ezekiel Montgomery watched their departure, his knuckles white around his silver-topped cane. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. The journey to Whisper Valley took nearly 2 hours, the wagon following a winding trail that climbed steadily away from town. Emma had fallen asleep against her mother's shoulder, exhausted from the morning's trauma and her breathing episode. Vivian kept one arm protectively around her daughter while trying to maintain her balance on the bouncing seat. Silas Hayes drove in silence, his eyes fixed on the path ahead, seemingly unbothered by the lack of conversation. Occasionally he would glance at Emma, a slight furrow appearing between his brows before his expression returned to its usual impassivity. When they crested the final rise, Whisper Valley spread before them like a secret the mountains had decided to share. Nestled between pine-covered slopes, the valley held a collection of well-maintained buildings, a 2-story farmhouse, a large barn, several outbuildings, and expansive gardens all arranged around a central yard. A small stream cut through the property, its banks lined with willows that swayed in the afternoon breeze. Vivian couldn't hide her surprise. The place was nothing like the ramshackle hermit's dwelling town gossip had led her to expect. "This is yours? All of it?" she asked, breaking their long silence. Silas nodded once. 5 years now. "It's beautiful," Vivian admitted, watching as the setting sun cast the valley in a golden glow. Something that might have been pride flickered across Silas's face, but he made no comment as he guided the wagon into the yard. As they approached, a large dog, part shepherd, part something wilder, came bounding from the porch, barking excitedly. The sound woke Emma, who sat up straight, her earlier fatigue forgotten. "A dog!" she exclaimed, her face lighting up. "That's Ranger," Silas said, pulling the wagon to a stop. "He won't hurt you." As if understanding, Ranger sat at attention beside the wagon, his tail sweeping the dirt in wide, hopeful arcs. "Can I pet him?" Emma asked eagerly. Silas hesitated, then nodded. "He likes his ears scratched." The moment they climbed down from the wagon, Emma approached Ranger with the fearless curiosity of childhood. The dog immediately rolled onto his back, making Vivian tense, but Emma just giggled and scratched his belly instead. "He likes me," she declared. "So it seems," Silas replied, the ghost of a smile touching his lips before vanishing. He led them to the farmhouse, opening the door and stepping back to let them enter first. Inside, Vivian found another surprise. The home was spotlessly clean, simply but comfortably furnished, with polished wooden floors and large windows that let in ample light. Bookshelves lined one wall of the sitting room, filled with volumes that, even from a distance, Vivian could tell were far from the typical farmer's almanacs or religious texts found in most frontier homes. "You'll stay here," Silas said, gesturing to the house. "Second floor has 3 bedrooms. Choose any but the one at the end of the hall." Vivian frowned. "Where will you sleep?" "I'll move to the workshop for now," he replied matter-of-factly. "It has a bed." "Mr. Hayes, we can't put you out of your home." "Silas," he interrupted, "and it's fine. I prefer it, actually." Something in his tone made it clear the matter wasn't up for discussion. He showed them around briefly: kitchen, pantry, water pump in the back that fed both the kitchen and a washroom addition that was uncommonly sophisticated for a rural property. Throughout the tour, Vivian noticed oddities: a locked door on the ground floor, shelves of books on medicine and anatomy, jars of herbs and compounds labeled in precise handwriting. As the evening deepened, Silas excused himself to tend to the animals, leaving Vivian and Emma to settle in. They chose the bedroom farthest from the mysterious locked room at the end of the hall, a pleasant chamber with twin beds and a window overlooking the gardens. After washing up and changing into the night clothes they'd brought in their hastily packed bags, Vivian tucked Emma into bed, smoothing back her blonde curls. "Are we going to live here now, Mama?" Emma asked, her blue eyes serious in her small face. "For a while," Vivian answered carefully. "Mr. Hayes, Silas, has been kind enough to let us stay and work for him." "I like him," Emma declared. "And Ranger, too." Vivian smiled despite her exhaustion. "Well, we'll try to be good guests and earn our keep." "Is he a doctor?" Emma asked suddenly. Vivian paused. "Why do you ask that, sweetheart?" "He made my chest feel better, like Dr. Martin used to. And I saw Dr. Books downstairs. I don't know, Vivian admitted. He says he just knows some medicine from living alone. Now sleep, my love. It's been a long day. Emma yawned, her eyelids already drooping. Good night, Mama. Good night, my brave girl, Vivian whispered, pressing a kiss to her daughter's forehead. Once Emma was asleep, Vivian moved to the window, gazing out at the moonlit valley. In the distance, she could see a light burning in what must be the workshop where Silas was staying. The man was an enigma, gruff and taciturn one moment, surprisingly gentle with Emma the next. And there was no denying his unexpected medical knowledge or the strangely well-appointed house that seemed at odds with his reputation in town. Her thoughts were interrupted by a sudden, sharp cry from Emma. Rushing to her daughter's bedside, Vivian found her in the grip of another hard episode, this one worse than at the marketplace. Emma, I'm here, she soothed, trying to mask her panic as her daughter's lips took on a frightening bluish tinge. Without thinking, Vivian scooped Emma into her arms and rushed down the stairs, out into the night air, running toward the workshop where Silas's lamp still burned. Silas, she called, pounding on the door with her free hand. Please, it's Emma. The door flew open immediately, revealing Silas in shirt sleeves, his expression alert despite the late hour. One look at Emma, and he stepped aside, gesturing to a workbench he was clearing with a sweep of his arm. Lay her down here, he instructed, already moving to a cabinet from which he retrieved several bottles and a small leather case. Vivian placed Emma gently on the cleared surface, holding her hand as the little girl gasped for breath. It's worse than before, she said, unable to keep the fear from her voice. Silas returned with a stethoscope, an instrument Vivian had only seen in doctors' offices, and listened intently to Emma's chest, his expression focused in a way that struck Vivian as distinctly professional. Working methodically, he prepared a mixture from several bottles, measuring precise amounts with the confident movements of someone who had done this countless times before. He added water from a kettle that had been keeping warm on a small stove, stirred the solution, then helped Emma drink it slowly. Breathe with me, Emma, he instructed, his voice gentle but authoritative. In and out. In and out. Gradually, Emma's breathing eased, her color improving as the medicine took effect. Soon she was breathing normally, though clearly exhausted from the ordeal. She'll be all right now, Silas said, packing away his instruments. But she should stay here for a while so I can monitor her. Only then did Vivian look around the workshop properly. What she saw made her breath catch. This was no ordinary farm workshop. One half indeed contained woodworking tools, but the other was essentially a small medical office, complete with instruments, reference books, and cabinets of supplies. You are a doctor, she said, the words falling between them like stones. Silas stiffened, his back to her as he arranged a blanket over Emma's now sleeping form. I told you, I know some medicine. No, Vivian interrupted, finding courage in her concern for Emma. No ordinary farmer has a stethoscope, or knows exactly what mixture to give for a heart condition, or has medical texts on their bookshelves. She stepped closer. Why lie about it? Silas turned to face her, his expression guarded. I was a doctor, once. I'm not anymore. Why, what happened? That doesn't matter, he replied, his voice taking on an edge. What matters is your daughter needs proper medical care. Her heart condition is serious. I know that, Vivian said, frustration coloring her words. Why do you think I was desperate enough to almost let Ezekiel take our home? Emma's medications cost almost everything I earn. Silas's expression softened slightly. The local doctor. Dr. Martin says there's nothing more he can do except make her comfortable. Vivian's voice broke. Do you know what that means? He's telling me to prepare for her to die. For a long moment, Silas said nothing, his gray eyes studying Vivian's face as if weighing something important. Finally, he sighed. I've been observing her symptoms, the heart condition she has. It's rare, but I've seen it before. He hesitated. I might be able to help her, but I need you to understand something. I'm not practicing medicine officially anymore. There are reasons for that I'm not going to discuss. But you can help her? Vivian pressed, hope and wariness warring within her. I can try, Silas answered carefully. No promises, but yes, I believe I can help. Why would you do that? You don't even know us. Silas turned away, busying himself with putting away the medicines. You're working for me now. I take care of my people. It wasn't the whole truth. Vivian could sense that much, but she was too exhausted and grateful to press further. Thank you, she said simply. Silas nodded once, still not meeting her eyes. There's a cot in the corner. You should rest too. I'll keep an eye on Emma tonight. Vivian wanted to object, to insist on staying by her daughter's side, but the events of the day suddenly crashed over her in a wave of bone-deep weariness. The cot looked impossibly inviting. Wake me if anything changes, she insisted. I will, Silas promised. As Vivian settled onto the cot, pulling a rough blanket over herself, she watched through half-closed eyes as Silas checked Emma's pulse once more, his large hand dwarfing her daughter's tiny wrist, his touch gentle in a way that belied his stern demeanor. The last thing she remembered before sleep claimed her was Silas sitting beside Emma, a leather-bound journal open on his lap, making careful notes by lamplight, his face set in lines of concentration that seemed both familiar and practiced. Whatever secrets Silas Hayes was keeping, Vivian was certain of one thing. He was no ordinary rancher. A week passed at Whisper Valley Ranch, each day falling into a rhythm that Vivian found surprisingly comfortable. Mornings began early with breakfast. Silas insisted on cooking this meal himself, producing simple but hearty fare before heading out to work the property. Vivian spent her days cleaning the already neat house, tending the vegetable garden that provided most of their food, and occasionally helping with the animals when Silas asked. Emma, to Vivian's relief, thrived in the mountain air. Her episodes became less frequent, and she spent happy hours following Ranger around the property or sitting in the shade watching Silas work, chattering away despite his limited responses. To Vivian's surprise, he seemed to tolerate the child's presence with more patience than she would have expected from the taciturn man. On the 8th day, Vivian was dusting the bookshelves in the sitting room when she noticed a leather-bound volume partially hidden behind the others. Curious, she pulled it out, finding a journal filled with precise handwriting. She knew she shouldn't pry, but a familiar name caught her eye. Emma. Heart-pounding, Vivian flipped through the pages. They contained detailed observations of Emma's condition, pulse rates, breathing patterns, observations about her color and energy levels, notes about medications and their effects. The entries began 3 weeks before they had arrived at the ranch. Vivian nearly dropped the journal. How could Silas have been tracking Emma's condition before they'd even met? Hearing footsteps on the birch, she hastily returned the book to its hiding place. Silas entered, removing his hat and hanging it on a peg by the door. "Where's Emma?" he asked, his usual greeting. "Napping," Vivian replied, trying to keep her voice steady. "Her color is better today." Silas nodded, seemingly satisfied. "I need to go into town for supplies. Would you like to come? You might want to pick up some things for yourself and Emma." The offer surprised her. It was the first time he'd suggested she leave the ranch since their arrival. "Yes," she said after a moment's consideration. "That would be nice." An hour later, Emma was settled in the back of the wagon with a pile of blankets and Ranger for company, while Vivian sat beside Silas on the driver's seat. The journey to town passed in their usual silence, broken only by Emma's occasional comments about birds or trees that caught her attention. Valley Ridge looked unchanged as they drove down the main street. The same dusty buildings, the same people going about their business. Yet Vivian felt like a different person returning to a place she'd only dreamed about. Heads turned as they passed, curious glances and not-so-whispered comments following in their wake. "Ignore them," Silas said quietly, the first words he'd spoken since they'd left the ranch. "I'm trying," Vivian replied, holding her head high despite the discomfort of being the subject of town gossip. They stopped first at the general store, where Mr. Abernathy greeted them with professional politeness, if not warmth. Silas handed Vivian some money. "Get what you and Emma need," he said. "I have some other business to attend to. Meet me back here in an hour." Before Vivian could ask about this other business, he was gone, striding purposefully down the street. With a sigh, she turned to the shelves, Emma's small hand in hers, and began selecting necessities: fabric for new clothes, soap, hairpins, and a small toy horse that Emma had been eyeing wistfully. Their shopping complete, Vivian decided to visit the small apothecary at the end of the street. Emma's supply of heart medicine from Dr. Martin was running low, and though Silas seemed to have effective remedies, she wanted a backup. The bell above the door tinkled as they entered the dim interior of the shop. Behind the counter stood an elderly woman with sharp eyes and silver hair, pulled into a severe bun. Dr. Josephine Whitaker had been Valley Ridge's only female medical practitioner for as long as anyone could remember. Not a full doctor by the town's reckoning, but a skilled nurse and midwife respected for her knowledge of herbal remedies. Mrs. Holloway, she greeted, her keen eyes moving from Vivian to Emma. And young Miss Emma, I heard you'd left town. We're staying at Whisper Valley Ranch, Vivian explained, approaching the counter. Mr. Hayes was kind enough to offer us work and lodging. Something flickered in Josephine's eyes. Recognition, perhaps even concern. The man on the hill, she said thoughtfully. And how is that arrangement working out? Well enough, Vivian replied cautiously. I've come for some of Emma's heart medicine. Josephine studied Emma carefully. She looks better than when I saw her last. Stronger. She's been having fewer episodes, Vivian agreed. The older woman leaned across the counter, her voice dropping. And has Mr. Hayes been attending to her condition? The careful phrasing made Vivian hesitate. He's been helpful, she answered noncommittally. He seems to know something about medicine. Josephine's mouth twitched. Does he now? She straightened up, reaching for a small bottle on a shelf behind her. I'm afraid I can't help much with Emma's condition, not beyond these drops to ease the symptoms when they come. She handed over the familiar brown bottle. But perhaps the man you're staying with can. He says he's not a doctor, Vivian ventured, testing the waters. Josephine's smile was enigmatic. Sometimes people aren't what they appear to be, Mrs. Holloway. Sometimes they have good reasons for that. Before Vivian could press further, the bell jingled again as the door opened. Sheriff Marcus Tanner entered, his tall frame filling the doorway. Despite his reputation for enjoying whiskey a bit too much, his eyes were clear today, his badge polished to a shine on his worn leather vest. Mrs. Holloway, he greeted, tipping his hat. Good to see you and the little one. Sheriff, Vivian replied with a nod. Heard you're staying up at Hayes' place, he continued, seemingly casual but with an undertone of concern. Everything all right up there? Perfectly fine, Vivian assured him, wondering why everyone seemed so interested in her living arrangements. Mr. Hayes has been a perfect gentleman. The sheriff nodded slowly. Good to hear. He keeps to himself mostly, but never caused any trouble. He turned to Josephine. Got those headache powders ready, Doc? On the counter, Sheriff, Josephine replied, gesturing to a small package. Though I still say you'd have fewer headaches if you had fewer whiskeys. Sheriff Tanner chuckled as he paid for his purchase. Probably right as usual. He tipped his hat again to Vivian. Mrs. Holloway, Miss Emma, you need anything, you let me know. After he left, Vivian paid for the medicine and was about to leave when Josephine called her back. Mrs. Holloway, a word of advice? The older woman's expression had grown serious. Whatever you discover up on that hill, remember that people deserve second chances, especially those trying to atone. Before Vivian could ask what she meant, Emma tugged at her hand. Mama, I'm hungry. We'll get something to eat before we go back, Vivian promised, nodding goodbye to Josephine. As they stepped out of the apothecary, Emma spotted a candy display in the window of the general store across the street. Can I look at the candies, Mama, please? Vivian hesitated, then nodded. Just for a minute, while I wait here. The apothecary was on a slight rise, giving her a good view of both Emma crossing the quiet street and most of the town center. As Emma pressed her nose to the window display, Vivian noticed movement at the bank down the street. Ezekiel Montgomery emerged with two men in expensive suits, strangers to Valley Ridge by the look of them. They spoke in hushed but animated tones, Ezekiel gesturing emphatically. Curiosity piqued, Vivian moved slightly closer, staying in the shadow of the apothecary's awning. The assay confirms it, one of the men was saying, his voice carrying on the still air. The silver deposit extends well into the Holloway property, which will be bank property soon enough, Ezekiel replied. The woman can't possibly repay Hayes. When she defaults, he'll take the land, and then we'll make him an offer he can't refuse. The second man frowned. And if he doesn't sell? Ezekiel's laugh was cold. Everyone has a price, or a pressure point. He adjusted his gold eagle pin. I've waited 3 years since Robert died. I won't let her slip away again. The men moved out of earshot, leaving Vivian frozen in place, mind racing. Silver on her land? Was that why Ezekiel had been so persistent? Why he'd been willing to take Emma as collateral, not just out of spite for her rejections, but for a treasure beneath her feet? "Mama, can I have a peppermint stick?" Emma called from across the street, breaking into her thoughts. "Yes, darling," Vivian called back automatically. "Go inside and pick one out. I'll be right there." As Emma disappeared into the store, Vivian tried to process what she'd overheard. If there was silver on their land, it could change everything. They wouldn't need charity or to work as servants. They could afford the best medical care for Emma. But first, she needed to understand what game Silas Hayes was playing. Why had he really helped them? And how did he know about Emma's condition before they'd met? Lost in thought, Vivian nearly collided with someone as she crossed toward the general store. "Excuse me, she began, then stopped short when she recognized Silas. He looked different here in town, tenser, his shoulders hunched slightly as if expecting a blow, his eyes constantly scanning their surroundings. He carried a parcel wrapped in brown paper under one arm. "Are you finished?" he asked, his voice lower than usual. "Almost," Vivian replied. "Emma's getting a candy. Did you complete your business?" He nodded, offering no details. "I'll wait with the wagon." As he turned to go, something fell from his pocket, a small envelope that fluttered to the ground unnoticed. Vivian quickly retrieved it, intending to call after him, but the name on the front caught her eye. Dr. Samuel Hayward. Heart pounding, she slipped the envelope into her own pocket just as Emma emerged from the store, proudly clutching a peppermint stick. "Look what I got, Mama." "It looks delicious, sweetheart," Vivian said, forcing a smile. "Let's go back to the wagon. Mr. Hayes is waiting." The return journey to Whisper Valley was quieter than the trip into town. Emma, tired from the excitement, dozed in the back with Ranger, while Vivian's mind raced with questions she didn't dare voice. The envelope burned in her pocket like a live coal. As they crested the final rise and the valley spread before them, bathed in late afternoon sunlight, Vivian couldn't help but see it differently now, not as a refuge, but as a place of secrets. Silas Hayes, or was it Samuel Hayward, was not who he claimed to be. The wagon rolled to a stop in the yard. Emma woke with a yawn, immediately brightening as she spotted the garden. "Mama, can I check on my flowers?" she asked, referring to a small patch of wildflowers Silas had allowed her to tend near the house. "Yes, but stay where I can see you," Vivian agreed, helping her down from the wagon. As Emma skipped toward her garden, Ranger loping alongside her, Silas began unloading their purchases. "I'll prepare dinner tonight," Vivian offered, "as thanks for the trip to town." And Silas nodded, his expression unreadable as always. "I need to check the north fence line first. I'll be back before dark." Once he'd ridden off, Vivian hurried inside and retrieved the journal she'd found earlier, then sat at the kitchen table and opened the mysterious envelope. Inside was a letter from Boston Medical Society addressed to Dr. Samuel Hayward, referencing a regrettable incident and pending investigation. The date was from 5 years ago. She was so engrossed in trying to piece together this puzzle that she didn't hear the approaching footsteps until Emma's delighted voice rang out from the doorway. "Look, Mama, Dr. Sam said I could pick flowers for the table." Vivian's head jerked up. Emma stood in the doorway, a crown of daisies on her head, clutching a bouquet of wildflowers. Behind her stood Silas, a basket of fresh vegetables in his arms, his expression thunderstruck. "Dr. Sam?" Vivian repeated slowly, rising to her feet. "Emma, why did you call Mr. Hayes that?" Emma looked between them, suddenly uncertain. "That's what it says on his books in the secret room. When I was playing hide and seek yesterday, I found them. Big doctor books with Dr. Samuel Hayward written inside." The silence that fell was absolute. Silas stood frozen in the doorway, the basket still in his arms, unable to deny what had been revealed by a child's innocent observation. Vivian drew a deep breath, meeting his stormy gaze directly. "I think," she said with a calmness she didn't feel, "it's time you told me who you really are. Dr. Hayward." The kitchen clock ticked loudly in the tense silence. Emma, sensing the sudden shift in atmosphere, looked uncertainly between the adults. "Did I say something wrong?" she asked in a small voice. Vivian forced a reassuring smile. "No, sweetheart, you didn't do anything wrong." She turned to Silas, who still hadn't moved from the doorway. "Emma, why don't you take Ranger outside and play for a little while? Mama needs to talk to Mr. Hayes." Emma hesitated, then nodded, placing her wildflower bouquet carefully on the table before slipping past Silas. "Come on, Ranger," she called, and the dog followed her obediently into the yard. Alone with Silas, Vivian waited, arms crossed over her chest, the letter and journal visible on the table behind her. Finally, Silas set down the vegetable basket and sighed, a sound so weary it seemed to come from somewhere deeper than his lungs. "I see you've been investigating," he said, nodding toward the papers. "Wouldn't you in my position?" Vivian countered. "A stranger helps us for no apparent reason, knows about my daughter's medical condition before meeting us, and keeps a locked room in his house. Then I find out he's been living under a false name." Silas's jaw tightened. "You went through my personal belongings. And you've been keeping notes on my daughter like she's some kind of medical experiment," Vivian shot back. "I think that gives me the right to some answers." For a long moment, they stared at each other across the kitchen, neither willing to back down. Then Silas reached into his pocket and withdrew a small key. "Come with me," he said, turning without waiting for a response. Vivian followed him through the house to the locked door she'd noticed on their first day. Silas unlocked it, pushed the door open, and stepped back to let her enter first. The room beyond was nothing like she'd expected. Instead of some dark secret, she found a small but fully equipped medical office. A desk sat beneath a window, covered with papers and medical journals. Bookshelves lined one wall, filled with leather-bound medical texts. A glass-fronted cabinet contained instruments and medicine bottles, all meticulously labeled. An examination table occupied the center of the room with a smaller table beside it holding surgical tools. "You really are a doctor," Vivian said softly, taking it all in. "I was," Silas corrected, remaining in the doorway as if unwilling to fully enter this space from his past. "Dr. Samuel Hayward, formerly of Boston Medical Society and Massachusetts General Hospital." "Why the deception?" Vivian asked, turning to face him. "Why live under a false name?" Silas's expression darkened. "Because Samuel Hayward is a name associated with failure, with death." He stepped into the room reluctantly, gesturing toward the desk. "I came here to escape that name, not to practice medicine. But old habits are hard to break." "And my daughter? How did you know about her condition before we met?" At this, Silas hesitated, then moved to the desk and opened a drawer, removing a folder. "I've been researching a specific heart condition for years. When I heard there was a child in town with symptoms that matched my area of study, I made inquiries." "You were spying on us?" "Observing, he corrected, opening the folder to reveal detailed notes. "Emma has a congenital heart defect, a ventricular septal defect with pulmonary hypertension. It's rare, especially the particular variant she has. Most doctors wouldn't recognize it." Vivian stared at the medical drawings and notes, most beyond her understanding despite her educated background. "And you can treat it?" "I've been developing a treatment, yes." Silas's voice took on a different quality, more confident, more engaged. "A combination of medications and eventually a surgical approach. It's experimental, but the preliminary results have been promising." "Is that why you helped us? Emma is, what, your research subject?" The accusation hit its mark. Silas flinched visibly. "It's not like that," he said firmly. "I want to help her. Yes, her case is valuable to my research, but..." "But what?" Vivian pressed when he fell silent. Silas turned away, staring out the window at the mountains beyond. "I couldn't save someone else with this condition. Perhaps I can save Emma." The admission hung between them, laden with unspoken grief. Vivian's anger softened despite herself. "Who couldn't you save?" Silas shook his head once sharply. "That doesn't matter now." Vivian stepped closer, studying his profile, the tension in his jaw, the subtle lines of pain around his eyes. "It matters to me. If I'm going to trust you with my daughter's life, I need to know who you really are." "I've told you who I am," Silas replied stiffly, "a former doctor who made a mistake he couldn't live with. The rest isn't relevant to Emma's treatment." Vivian considered pushing further, but recognized the wall he'd thrown up. Instead, she changed tack. "These treatments you mentioned, are they why Emma has been improving?" Silas nodded, seeming relieved at the shift in topic. "The herbal mixture I've been giving her helps manage the symptoms. The real treatment would require more intervention." "Surgery?" Vivian asked, her stomach clenching at the thought. "Eventually, yes, but there are preparatory steps first." Silas turned back to her, his expression earnest in a way she hadn't seen before. I know I've given you little reason to trust me, Mrs. Holloway, but I do believe I can help Emma. Not just manage her condition, but potentially cure it. Vivian studied him, trying to reconcile the gruff rancher with this articulate physician. Why hide all this? Why pretend to be someone else? Silas's momentary openness receded. As I said, Samuel Hayward is a name I left behind for good reason. The fewer people who know my real identity, the better. For everyone's safety. Before Vivian could question this cryptic statement, they heard Emma calling from outside. Mama, Dr. Sam, come see what Ranger found. They looked at each other, the moment broken. Silas moved to leave the room, then paused in the doorway. I understand if you want to leave, he said quietly. I can arrange transportation back to town tomorrow. Vivian considered her options. Return to town with no home, no prospects, and a sick child, or stay with this enigmatic man who had lied about his identity but seemed genuinely capable of helping Emma. We'll stay, she decided, for now, but no more secrets, Silas, or Samuel, or whatever you prefer to be called. Silas is fine, he replied, and I'll try. It wasn't quite a promise, but it was something. As they walked outside to where Emma waited excitedly by a fallen log, Vivian noticed something she'd missed earlier, a photograph on the desk, partly hidden under papers. A younger Silas stood beside a beautiful dark-haired woman, both dressed in formal attire, both smiling in a way that suggested complete happiness. Whoever Silas Hayes had been before coming to Whisper Valley, he had known joy once, and lost it somehow. Emma's discovery turned out to be a bird's nest with 3 tiny blue eggs, carefully protected in the hollow of the log. As she chattered enthusiastically about the mama bird they'd seen, Vivian watched Silas. His face softened as he knelt beside Emma, explaining with unexpected patience how the mother bird would care for her babies. Whatever secrets he still kept, whatever guilt he carried, there was genuine kindness in him. For now, that would have to be enough. That night, after Emma was asleep, Vivian stood at her bedroom window, gazing out at the moonlit valley. In the distance, she could see the lamplight burning in Silas's workshop, a lonely sentinel in the darkness. The man was still an enigma, part gruff recluse, part brilliant physician, all wrapped in a shroud of secrecy and apparent guilt. Tomorrow, she resolved, she would begin her own investigation into Dr. Samuel Hayward and whatever regrettable incident had driven him to hide in these mountains under an assumed name. Emma's future might depend on it. In the soft Wyoming darkness, the wind whispered through the pines, carrying echoes of secrets not yet revealed. Somewhere in the distance, a wolf howled, a long, lonely sound that seemed to embody the isolation of the man who had brought them to this hidden valley. Vivian shivered, drew the curtains closed, and prepared for sleep. Whatever tomorrow brought, she would face it with the same determination that had carried her through the 3 difficult years since Robert's death. Her last thought before drifting off was of the photograph she'd glimpsed. Silas and the beautiful woman, their happiness preserved in time like insects in amber. A moment of joy before whatever tragedy had sent him fleeing to this remote valley, carrying his guilt and secrets like stones in his pockets, weighing him down with every step. The old piano stood in the corner of Silas's sitting room, its mahogany surface dulled by years of disuse, a silent sentinel of some forgotten past. Vivian had noticed it their first night at Whisper Valley, but had been too preoccupied with their sudden change in circumstances to pay it much mind. Now, 2 weeks after discovering Silas's true identity, she found herself drawn to it in the quiet evening hours. Emma had gone to bed early, exhausted from a day spent helping Silas in the garden. The little girl had taken to following him everywhere, peppering him with endless questions that he answered with surprising patience. More surprising still was Emma's improved health, her episodes now rare, her cheeks flushed with a healthy pink that Vivian hadn't seen in years. The house was silent, save for the ticking of the grandfather clock and the occasional creak of the old farmhouse settling. Silas had retreated to his medical room after dinner, as had become his custom. Though he no longer pretended to be a simple rancher, he maintained his reserved demeanor, speaking little unless the topic concerned Emma's treatment or the daily operation of the ranch. Vivian ran her fingers lightly over the piano keys, careful not to press hard enough to make a sound. How long had it been since she'd played? Before Robert's death, certainly. Music had been one of the first joys she'd sacrificed when money grew scarce. Before she could reconsider, Vivian settled onto the bench and pressed a key. The note rang out, surprisingly in tune. Another followed, then another, until she found herself playing a nocturne she'd learned as a girl in her father's house, muscle memory guiding her fingers through the complex passages. The music filled the room, flowing through the house like water finding its level, a kind of emotional release she hadn't allowed herself in years. Vivian closed her eyes, surrendering to the melody, unaware that she was no longer alone. When the final notes faded, she opened her eyes to find Silas standing in the doorway, his expression unreadable in the lamplight. Vivian startled, her hands flying from the keys. "I'm sorry, I shouldn't have—" "No," Silas interrupted, his voice unusually soft. "Please don't stop on my account." "I didn't mean to disturb you," Vivian said, embarrassed at being caught in this moment of vulnerability. Silas stepped into the room, his gaze fixed on the piano. "Elizabeth played that same piece," he said quietly, "on the last night." The admission hung in the air between them. It was the first time he'd mentioned any name from his past. "Elizabeth?" Vivian prompted gently. For a moment, she thought he would retreat, close himself off as he had whenever she tried to learn more about him. Instead, he moved to a cabinet, withdrew a bottle of whiskey and 2 glasses, and poured a small measure into each. "My wife," he said, offering Vivian a glass. "She died 5 years ago." Vivian accepted the glass but didn't drink. "I'm sorry." Silas took a seat in the armchair across from the piano, swirling the amber liquid in his glass. "She was a music teacher, brought that piano with her when we married. Said a house without music was just a building, not a home." In the soft lamplight, his features seemed less stern, the lines of habitual tension smoothed by memory and perhaps by the rare act of sharing. "She sounds lovely," Vivian said. She was. A ghost of a smile touched his lips before vanishing. "Brilliant, beautiful, kind. Everything I wasn't." "What happened to her?" Vivian asked, sensing they were on fragile ground but unable to resist the opportunity to understand more about this enigmatic man. The silence stretched so long that Vivian thought he wouldn't answer. Then, almost imperceptibly, Silas's shoulders slumped. "She died on my operating table." The words fell between them like stones. Vivian's breath caught, understanding blooming with sudden clarity. "The regrettable incident," the letter mentioned. Silas nodded once, taking a swallow of whiskey. "Elizabeth had a heart condition, similar to Emma's, though more advanced. She was pregnant. There were complications." His voice, normally so controlled, wavered slightly. "I thought I could save them both. I was wrong." "You operated on your own wife?" Vivian couldn't keep the shock from her voice. "No other surgeon would attempt it. They all advised terminating the pregnancy to save Elizabeth. We couldn't accept that." His gray eyes were distant, seeing something far beyond the room. "I was arrogant enough to think I could succeed where others feared to trauma." "That's not arrogance," Vivian said softly. "That's love." Silas's gaze snapped back to her, surprised by her response. For a moment, something raw and vulnerable flickered in his eyes before he shuddered it away. "The outcome was the same," he said flatly. "I lost them both, Elizabeth and our daughter." Vivian's heart ached for him. "And that's why you left Boston? Why you changed your name?" "Partly." Silas set down his glass, the brief moment of openness clearly passing. "It's late. You should get some rest." But Vivian wasn't ready to let the conversation end. "Is that why you were watching Emma? Because her condition reminds you of Elizabeth's?" Silas stood, his expression closing like a door being shut. "As I said, I've been researching this condition for years. Emma's case is valuable to my work." "That's not an answer," Vivian pressed, standing as well. "There's more you're not telling me." "There's always more, Mrs. Holloway." His use of her formal name was deliberate, rebuilding the wall between them. "But not everything needs to be shared. Good night." Before she could respond, he was gone, the front door closing quietly behind him as he retreated to his workshop. Vivian remained by the piano, her untouched whiskey in hand, processing what she'd learned. Silas Hayes, Dr. Samuel Hayward, had lost his wife and unborn child to the same condition, threatening Emma. He tried to save them and failed. Now he sought redemption by trying to save her daughter. It explained much, but not everything. Not why he'd chosen to help them specifically, nor why he was so intent on maintaining his false identity. What was he still hiding? Vivian set down her glass and moved to the window, watching as Silas crossed the yard to his workshop, his shoulders hunched against some invisible weight. In the pale moonlight, he looked solitary and burdened in a way that stirred unexpected compassion in her. Perhaps they were not so different, she thought, both carrying grief, both trying to build new lives from the wreckage of the old, both fiercely protective of what little remained to them. As she turned from the window, Vivian noticed something she'd overlooked before, a small silver frame half hidden on a bookshelf, face down as if deliberately concealed. Picking it up, she found herself looking at the photograph she'd glimpsed in Silas's medical room. Him and the dark-haired woman, Elizabeth, smiling at some long-ago moment of happiness. But there was something else in the picture that made Vivian's breath catch. A gold eagle pin on Elizabeth's shawl, identical to the one Ezekiel Montgomery wore proudly on his lapel daily. Before she could process this discovery, a small voice came from the stairway. "Mama, I heard music." Vivian quickly returned the photograph to its place, turning to find Emma in her nightgown, rubbing sleep from her eyes. "I was just playing the piano, sweetheart," Vivian said, crossing to lift her daughter into her arms. "I'm sorry I woke you." Emma laid her head on Vivian's shoulder, yawning. "It was pretty, like in my dream." "What dream, love?" "The one with the lady who plays piano," Emma murmured, already drifting back to sleep. "She says Dr. Sam needs to forgive himself." A chill ran down Vivian's spine. "What lady, Emma?" But Emma was asleep again, her breathing deep and even against Vivian's neck. Vivian stood in the quiet house, holding her sleeping daughter, the mystery deepening around them like the darkness beyond the windows. The eagle pin in the photograph. Elizabeth's maiden name. Could it have been Montgomery? And Emma's dream. Tomorrow she decided she would go back to town. There were questions that needed answers, and she suspected those answers weren't to be found within the confines of Whisper Valley. The following morning, Vivian announced her intention to visit town for supplies. If Silas suspected her true purpose, he gave no indication, merely offering the use of the small buggy rather than the larger wagon. "It's easier to handle alone," he said over breakfast, not quite meeting her eyes after their conversation the previous night. "Thank you," Vivian replied, equally formal. "I shouldn't be gone long. Emma can stay here if that's all right." At this, Silas looked up, a flicker of surprise crossing his features. "You're comfortable leaving her?" The question carried more weight than its simple words suggested. It was the first time Vivian had considered leaving Emma in his sole care, a test of the fragile trust building between them. "She's better with you than anywhere else," Vivian said honestly, "and she loves it here." Something shifted in Silas's expression, a softening, perhaps even gratitude. He nodded once. "We'll be fine. I plan to show her how to harvest herbs from the garden today." Emma, delighted at the prospect of staying with Dr. Sam and Ranger, barely paused in her breakfast to kiss Vivian goodbye. As Vivian drove away from the ranch, she glanced back to see her daughter and Silas heading toward the garden, the child skipping beside the tall, solemn man, chattering animatedly while he listened with his characteristic quiet attention. The image stayed with her as she followed the winding road down to Valley Ridge, a picture of unlikely companionship that somehow felt right despite its strangeness. The town was quieter than on market day, though the usual business of a small frontier community continued around the main street. Vivian's first stop was the sheriff's office, where she found Marcus Tanner at his desk, reading through wanted posters with a cup of coffee at his elbow. "Mrs. Holloway," he greeted, standing as she entered, "twice in as many weeks. To what do I owe the pleasure?" Vivian closed the door behind her, ensuring privacy. "I need information, Sheriff, about Ezekiel Montgomery's family." Tanner's bushy eyebrows rose, but he gestured to the chair opposite his desk. "Interesting question. Any particular reason?" "I'm just trying to understand some things," Vivian hedged, taking the seat. The sheriff studied her for a moment, then shrugged. "Not much to tell that isn't common knowledge. Ezekiel came from back east, Philadelphia, I think, about 10 years ago, bought into the bank, eventually took it over. Keeps mostly to himself except for business." "Does he have any family? Siblings, perhaps?" Tanner stroked his mustache thoughtfully. "There was a sister, I believe. Never met her myself. Heard she died some years back. Vivian leaned forward slightly. Do you know her name or how she died? Oh, now that's a specific question, Tanner remarked, eyeing her with increased interest. Don't recall the name, but rumor had it she died in some sort of medical situation. Childbirth, maybe? Why the curiosity about Montgomery's family tree? Just trying to understand the man who nearly took my daughter, Vivian replied, the partial truth coming easily. Tanner's expression softened with sympathy. Fair enough. Though if you really want to know about Ezekiel's past, you might try the church records. Reverend Eli keeps track of births, deaths, marriages, all the important events. If Montgomery's sister died in Valley Ridge, it would be recorded there. Thank you, Sheriff, Vivian said, rising to leave. One more question, if you don't mind. What do you know about Dr. Samuel Hayward? The change in Tanner's demeanor was subtle but immediate. A slight tensing of his shoulders, a wariness entering his eyes. Never heard the name, he said, a beat too quickly. Oui, Bino. It was mentioned in a letter I came across, Vivian said carefully. I was curious. Well, I can't help you there, Tanner replied, standing and moving toward the door in a clear sign the conversation was over. Valley Ridge is too small for doctors with fancy names, just old Doc Martin and Nurse Whitaker. His obvious discomfort confirmed Vivian's suspicion. The sheriff knew more than he was saying. She thanked him and left, pondering this new piece of the puzzle as she made her way towards St. Mary's Church at the end of the main street. The small white church stood apart from the other buildings, surrounded by a well-kept yard and a modest cemetery. As Vivian approached, she noticed Reverend Eli Sullivan tending to flower beds near the entrance. He was a man of perhaps 60, with kind eyes and work-roughened hands that spoke of a life lived in service to both God and community. Mrs. Holloway, he called, straightening as she approached. What a pleasant surprise. How are you finding life at Whisper Valley? Peaceful, Vivian answered truthfully. Mr. Hayes has been very accommodating. The Reverend's smile was gentle. I'm glad to hear it. Silas is a good man, though he keeps to himself more than is healthy, I think. The casual use of Silas's first name suggested a familiarity beyond the usual minister-parishioner relationship. Vivian filed this observation away as she explained her interest in the church records. I'm researching some local history, she said, the lie coming less easily to this man of God, particularly regarding the Montgomery family. If the Reverend found her request odd, he didn't show it. Of course, the records are inside. Please follow me. He led her into the cool interior of the church and through a side door to a small office. From a bookshelf, he retrieved several leather-bound ledgers. These contain all the vital records for Valley Ridge and the surrounding area for the past 15 years, he explained, setting them on a table. Births, deaths, marriages, baptisms. What specifically are you looking for? Information about Ezekiel Montgomery's sister, Vivian replied. Boy, I believe she died some years ago. A shadow passed over Reverend Eli's face. Elizabeth. Yes, a tragedy. She wasn't a resident here, though. She died in Boston, as I recall. Elizabeth Montgomery, Vivian repeated, the confirmation sending a chill through her, despite the warm day. Do you happen to know how she died? The Reverend hesitated. I'm not comfortable discussing such personal matters, Mrs. Holloway. May I ask why you're interested? Vivian weighed her options, then decided on a version of the truth. I'm trying to understand Ezekiel's hostility toward me and my daughter. I thought knowing more about his past might help. Reverend Eli's expression softened. I see. Well, I can tell you that Ezekiel and his sister were very close. Her death changed him, hardened him, I think. He wasn't always the man you see today. Was she married? Vivian pressed. Did she have another name? The Reverend studied her for a long moment, as if trying to discern her true motives. Finally, he sighed. Elizabeth Montgomery Hayward. She married a doctor from Boston. That's all I feel comfortable sharing, Mrs. Holloway. The confirmation struck Vivian like a physical blow. Elizabeth Montgomery Hayward, Silas's wife and Ezekiel's sister. The connection she'd suspected existed, now confirmed. Thank you, Reverend, she said, trying to keep her voice steady. You've been very helpful. Mrs. Holloway, he called as she turned to leave. Whatever you're searching for, remember that God values forgiveness above all else, even for those who cannot forgive themselves. The words followed her out of the church, echoing strangely with Emma's report of her dream. The piano-playing lady who said Dr. Sam needed to forgive himself. Vivian's final stop was the telegraph office, where she sent a message to her brother Jonathan in Denver, requesting any information he could find about Dr. Samuel Hayward and a medical incident in Boston 5 years prior. As a newspaper reporter, Jonathan had resources and connections she lacked. With her errands complete, both the stated and the secret ones, Vivian turned the buggy back toward Whisper Valley. Her mind raced with what she'd learned. Silas Hayes was Dr. Samuel Hayward, who had been married to Elizabeth Montgomery Hayward, sister of Ezekiel Montgomery. Elizabeth had died during an operation performed by her husband, an operation intended to save both her and their unborn child. No wonder Ezekiel hated Silas. In his eyes, the doctor had killed his sister. But why had Silas come to Valley Ridge specifically? Was it coincidence or something more deliberate? And why had he helped Vivian and Emma, knowing it would bring him into direct conflict with his former brother-in-law? The answers, she suspected, lay back at the ranch with the man who had saved them from Ezekiel, only to potentially put them in greater danger by association. As the buggy crested the final hill before Whisper Valley, Vivian was so lost in thought that she almost didn't notice the rider approaching from the opposite direction. Only when they were nearly upon each other did she recognize Ezekiel Montgomery himself, mounted on his distinctive black stallion. "Mrs. Holloway," he greeted, tipping his hat with false courtesy as he reined his horse alongside her buggy. "What a fortunate encounter." "Mr. Montgomery," Vivian acknowledged stiffly, drawing the buggy to a halt. "I'm in something of a hurry." "Back to Hayes's ranch, I presume?" Ezekiel's smile didn't reach his cold eyes. "How is life with our reclusive neighbor? Comfortable?" "Quite," Vivian replied, unwilling to give him the satisfaction of seeing her discomfort at his sudden appearance. Ezekiel leaned slightly closer, his voice dropping to a confidential tone. "Has he told you who he really is yet? Or is he still playing the simple rancher?" The question confirmed Vivian's suspicion that Ezekiel knew Silas's true identity. She kept her expression neutral. "Mr. Hayes has been nothing but kind to Emma and me." "Kind," Ezekiel repeated, a bitter edge to his laugh. "Yes, he can appear kind when it suits him. Just as he appeared competent and caring before he killed my sister." Though she had anticipated this revelation, hearing it stated so baldly still sent a shock through Vivian. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said, grateful her voice remained steady. "Don't you?" Ezekiel's eyes narrowed. "I think you do, Mrs. Holloway. I think you've begun to piece it together. Hayes, or should I say Dr. Hayward, isn't who he pretends to be." "Neither are you," Vivian retorted, anger flaring suddenly, pretending concern while trying to take my child. Ezekiel's expression hardened. "I was giving you an opportunity to repay your debt with dignity. Now you're indebted to a man who killed his own wife and unborn child through arrogance and incompetence." "That's not what happened," Vivian said before she could stop herself. Triumph flashed in Ezekiel's eyes. "So he has told you. Interesting." He straightened in his saddle. "A word of advice, Mrs. Holloway. Don't grow too attached to life at Whisper Valley. Your benefactor's past is about to catch up with him." With that cryptic warning, he tipped his hat again and spurred his horse forward, continuing toward town without a backward glance. Vivian remained still for a moment, processing the encounter. Ezekiel knew who Silas was, had known all along presumably, yet he'd never exposed him publicly. Why? And what did he mean about Silas's past catching up with him? With a growing sense of urgency, Vivian snapped the reins and set the buggy moving at a faster pace toward Whisper Valley. She found Silas and Emma in the garden, the little girl carefully pulling carrots under his patient guidance. The domestic tranquility of the scene stood in stark contrast to the turmoil in Vivian's mind. "Mama," Emma called, running to show off her harvest. "Look what I grew." "That's wonderful, sweetheart," Vivian said, forcing a smile as she accepted the dirt-covered carrot. "Why don't you take these inside and wash them for dinner?" Once Emma had skipped off toward the house, Ranger at her heels, Vivian turned to Silas. "We need to talk," she said without preamble, "about Elizabeth Montgomery Hayward." Silas went utterly still, his expression freezing into a mask of control. Only his eyes betrayed his shock, widening almost imperceptibly before narrowing in resignation. "I see you've been busy in town," he said finally, his voice carefully neutral. "I met Ezekiel on the road back," Vivian continued. "He knows who you are, Silas. He says your past is about to catch up with you." A muscle ticked in Silas's jaw. Ezekiel has been making that threat for years. So you came here knowing he was here? Why? Why put yourself so close to a man who believes you killed his sister? Silas looked away toward the mountains that rim the valley. It's complicated. Uncomplicated, Vivian demanded, her patience worn thin by half-truths and evasions. My daughter is involved now. I deserve to know what kind of danger we might be in. Silas was silent for so long that Vivian Barme he thought he might refuse to answer. Then, with a deep sigh, he gestured toward a bench at the garden's edge. You should sit, he said. This is a long story and not a pleasant one. As the sun began its descent toward the western peaks, casting long shadows across Whisper Valley, Silas finally revealed the full truth of his past and why he had really helped Vivian and Emma that day in the marketplace. The garden bench was worn smooth by years of use, the wood bearing silent witness to countless conversations, though perhaps none as charged as this. Vivian sat with her hands folded tightly in her lap, watching Silas as he paced before her, clearly struggling with where to begin. I met Elizabeth Montgomery in Boston at a charity ball for the hospital, he said finally, his voice low and controlled. She was visiting from Philadelphia, staying with family friends. She was luminous, intelligent, passionate about music, full of life. He paused, gazing toward the mountains as if seeing into the past. We married within 6 months, against her brother's wishes. Ezekiel thought she was marrying beneath her station. The Montgomerys were old money, and I was just a doctor, talented but from humble origins. But you married anyway, Vivian prompted when he fell silent. Silas nodded. Elizabeth wasn't one to be told what to do. She defied her brother, and we were happy, truly happy, for nearly 3 years. His pacing stopped, and he stood with his back to Vivian, shoulders rigid. When she became pregnant, we were overjoyed. But in her 4th month, she developed symptoms: shortness of breath, fatigue, chest pain. Tests revealed a congenital heart defect that had gone undetected all her life. The pregnancy was putting tremendous strain on her heart. Vivian's own heart clenched, hearing echoes of Emma's condition. What did the other doctor say? That she should terminate the pregnancy to save herself, Silas replied, his voice hollow. But Elizabeth refused. She was determined to give our child a chance at life, whatever the cost. He turned to face Vivian, his expression raw with remembered pain. I researched day and night, developed a surgical approach that might save them both. It was experimental, risky, but it was their only chance. And you performed the surgery yourself, Vivian said softly, understanding the impossible position he'd been in. Silas nodded, his eyes haunted. No other surgeon would attempt it. They said it was too dangerous, that I was too emotionally involved. They were right, of course, but I couldn't just stand by and watch my wife and child die without trying. He sat heavily on the bench beside Vivian, staring at his hands. The surgery initially seemed successful. Elizabeth's heart responded well to the repair, but there were complications, bleeding I couldn't control. By the time I realized what was happening, it was too late. I lost them both. The grief in his voice was so palpable that Vivian found herself reaching out, placing her hand over his. He stiffened at the contact but didn't pull away. Ezekiel was devastated, Silas continued, and furious. He filed a formal complaint with the medical board, claiming negligence and malpractice. There was an investigation, but ultimately I was cleared. The procedure was experimental, and Elizabeth had given full, informed consent. But you couldn't forgive yourself, Vivian said, understanding dawning. How could I? Silas asked simply. I failed the 2 people who mattered most. Being cleared legally didn't absolve me of responsibility. So you left Boston. I left everything, he corrected. My practice, my reputation, my home. I traveled west, intending to leave medicine behind completely. But then what? Vivian prompted when he trailed off. Silas hesitated, then reached into his pocket and withdrew a folded letter, handing it to her. This arrived 3 years ago. Vivian carefully unfolded the paper, recognizing the handwriting immediately. This is from Robert, she gasped, staring at her late husband's familiar script. He wrote to me, to Dr. Hayward, about Emma's condition, Silas confirmed. He'd read about my research in a medical journal and was desperate for help. Vivian scanned the letter, tears filling her eyes as she read Robert's passionate plea for someone to help their daughter. But how did he find you here? He didn't, Silas clarified. The letter was sent to my former colleague in Boston, who forwarded it here. By the time I received it and responded, Robert had died. The fire, Vivian whispered. Silas nodded grimly. When I learned what had happened to him, and that you and Emma were struggling under Ezekiel's thumb, I began making inquiries. I wanted to honor Robert's request and help Emma, but I needed to understand why Ezekiel was so fixated on your family. A cold realization settled in Vivian's stomach. You think Ezekiel had something to do with the fire? I can't prove it, Silas admitted, but the timing is suspicious. Robert discovers silver on your property, reaches out to a medical specialist about Emma, and suddenly dies in a tragic accident. Vivian stood abruptly, pacing as Silas had done earlier. Silver, what are you talking about? You don't know? Silas looked genuinely surprised. There's a silver deposit that runs through this valley, including under your former property. Robert discovered it shortly before his death. It's worth a fortune. That's why Ezekiel has been so determined to get our land, Vivian said, the pieces falling into place. Not just because I rejected him, but because of the silver. She turned to Silas, a new question forming. But why did you settle here, so close to Ezekiel? If you wanted to escape your past, why come to the same town as your greatest enemy? Something shifted in Silas's expression, a flicker of determination beneath the grief. Because I needed to know the truth, about what happened to Elizabeth, about what Ezekiel might be hiding. What do you mean? Silas stood, moving to a small shed adjacent to the garden. He returned with a lockbox, which he opened to reveal another set of papers. Elizabeth's medical records, he explained. After her death, I reviewed them obsessively, looking for anything I might have missed, and I found something strange. He handed Vivian a laboratory report. Her blood work showed traces of foxglove, a plant that affects heart rhythm. In small doses, it can help certain heart conditions. In larger amounts, it can exacerbate them or even be fatal. You think someone poisoned her? Vivian asked, horrified. I think someone may have been tampering with her medication, Silas corrected carefully, making her condition worse over time, perhaps hoping for exactly the outcome that occurred, that she would die despite medical intervention. Ezekiel, Vivian breathed, the accusation hanging in the air. Silas neither confirmed nor denied it. I have suspicions, not proof. Elizabeth trusted her brother implicitly. He often brought her tea, tonics he claimed would strengthen her heart. But why would he harm his own sister? Control, Silas said simply. Ezekiel couldn't bear that Elizabeth had chosen her own path, defied his wishes. When she became pregnant, cementing our family and further removing her from his influence. He trailed off, shaking his head. As I said, I have suspicions, not proof. And now Emma has the same condition, Vivian said, cold fear seeping into her veins. A similar condition, Silas corrected. But yes, when Robert's letter arrived describing her symptoms, I recognized the parallels immediately. I couldn't save Elizabeth and our child, but perhaps I could save Emma. So you came to Valley Ridge to investigate Ezekiel while waiting for an opportunity to help us, Vivian summarized, trying to process everything she'd learned. Silas nodded. I didn't expect Ezekiel to be so aggressive in his pursuit of your land. When I saw him about to take Emma that day in the marketplace, I had to intervene. I couldn't wait any longer. At the risk of exposing yourself, Vivian noted, he recognized you immediately, didn't he? He's always known I was here, Silas admitted. We've had an unspoken arrangement. He doesn't expose my true identity, and I don't share my suspicions about Elizabeth's death. A stalemate of mutually assured destruction. Until now, Vivian said, remembering Ezekiel's warning on the road. He said your past is about to catch up with you. Silas's expression hardened. He's threatened that before. This time may be different, though, because of you and Emma. Because you've chosen sides, Vivian realized. By helping us, you've broken the stalemate. Before Silas could respond, they heard Emma calling from the house, her voice bright with childish excitement. Mama, Dr. Sam, come see what I found in the attic. They exchanged a look, the weight of their conversation settling around them like a heavy cloak. We should go to her, Vivian said, but this conversation isn't finished. Silas nodded grimly. No, it's not, but Emma shouldn't be part of it. As they walked toward the house, Vivian's mind raced with everything she'd learned. Silas had come to Whisper Valley not to hide from his past, but to confront it. He'd been watching over them from afar, honoring Robert's request while gathering evidence against Ezekiel. And now, by openly helping them, he'd escalated a silent war that had been simmering for years. What would Ezekiel do next? And how could she protect Emma from becoming collateral damage in a battle that had begun long before they entered the picture? Emma stood on the porch, proudly holding a dusty wooden box. Look what Ranger found in the attic. It was behind some old trunks. As they climbed the porch steps, Vivian noticed Silas falter, his eyes fixed on the box in Emma's hands. Where exactly did you find that? He asked, his voice carefully controlled. In the little room under the roof, Emma explained. Ranger was sniffing at a loose board, and when I pulled it up, this was hidden underneath. Silas reached for the bind, taking it gently from Emma's hands. This belonged to Elizabeth, he said quietly. The piano lady? Emma asked innocently. Silas's head snapped up, his eyes wide with shock. What did you say? The lady who plays piano in my dreams, Emma explained, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. She has dark hair and wears a pretty blue dress. She tells me not to be afraid of my heart. Vivian watched the color drain from Silas's face. Emma, sweetheart, how do you know about the piano lady? She asked carefully. She comes to me when I'm sleeping, Emma replied. She says she's watching over me because Dr. Sam helped her before. Silas sat heavily on the porch step, the box clutched in his hands, his expression one of profound shock. Elizabeth had a blue dress, he said, so quietly Vivian barely heard him. It was her favorite. She wore it the day we met. A chill ran down Vivian's spine. How could Emma know such details? Was it possible her daughter somehow had a connection to Silas's dead wife? Before she could pursue this unsettling thought, the sound of approaching hoofbeats drew their attention. A rider was galloping up the road to Whisper Valley. Sheriff Tanner, his expression grim, as he reined his horse to a stop at the foot of the porch. Silas, he called, dispensing with formalities. You've got trouble. Ezekiel's brought a doctor from Boston, a Dr. Richardson from the medical board. They're claiming you're practicing medicine illegally, putting lives at risk. He glanced at Emma, then back to Silas. They've got a warrant for your arrest, and they're on their way here now. The silence that followed Sheriff Tanner's announcement seemed to stretch into eternity. Even the gentle Wyoming breeze stilled, as if nature itself held its breath in anticipation of what would come next. Silas stood slowly, the wooden box still clutched in his hands, his face a study in contained emotion. How much time do we have? He asked, his voice steady despite the circumstances. 20 minutes, maybe less, Tanner replied. Ezekiel, Dr. Richardson, and 2 deputies are already on their way up from town. Vivian instinctively pulled Emma closer. What exactly are they accusing him of? The sheriff's weathered face was grim. Practicing medicine without a license in Wyoming territory, falsifying identity, and, he hesitated, glancing at Emma, endangering a child with experimental medical procedures. Silas's knuckles whitened around the box. Ezekiel's work, obviously. Obviously, Tanner agreed. This Dr. Richardson claims you were struck off the medical register after your wife's death. Says you have no right to treat patients anywhere, let alone here. That's a lie, Silas replied, a controlled fury in his voice. I was cleared of all charges. I left practice voluntarily. Emma looked up, confusion in her blue eyes. Are you in trouble, Dr. Sam? The innocent question seemed to cut through Silas's anger. He knelt before the child, setting the wooden box aside to place his hands gently on her shoulders. Some people think I shouldn't be helping you get better, Emma, but I promised your father I would, and I intend to keep that promise. What do we do? Vivian asked, her mind racing. Can we fight this? Sheriff Tanner removed his hat, running a hand through his thinning hair. Richardson has papers from Boston Medical Society, official-looking documents claiming Samuel Hayward is unfit to practice. Whether they're genuine or Ezekiel's forgeries, they'll be enough for an arrest. And once they have me in custody, Silas added grimly, Ezekiel will make sure I never get a fair hearing. You could run, Tanner suggested, replacing his hat. I didn't have to ride ahead to warn you. Silas shook his head firmly. I've been running for 5 years. It hasn't solved anything. He turned to Vivian, his gray eyes intense. But you and Emma should go. Now, take the wagon and head west. I have a colleague in Idaho who can continue Emma's treatment. No, Vivian said, surprising herself with the firmness of her refusal. We're not leaving you to face this alone. This isn't your fight. It became my fight when you saved my daughter in the marketplace, Vivian countered. When you honored my husband's request for help. We're staying. The look that passed between them carried the weight of everything that had gone unspoken. Trust, respect, and perhaps something more. Something neither was ready to name. Their moment of connection was broken by Emma's exclamation. The box is glowing. All eyes turned to the wooden container Silas had set on the porch step. A thin beam of afternoon sunlight had found its way through the porch railings, illuminating the dusty surface and highlighting an almost invisible seam along one side. Silas picked up the box, examining it closely. A false bottom, he murmured, sliding his fingernail along the seam until a hidden compartment popped open. Inside lay a folded letter and a small leather journal. Silas unfolded the letter first, his expression shifting from curiosity to shock as he read. What is it? Vivian asked. It's from Elizabeth, Silas said, his voice barely above a whisper. Dated 3 days before her death. He looked up, his eyes haunted. She suspected Ezekiel was poisoning her. Sheriff Tanner stepped closer. What? Silas handed him the letter. She writes that she caught Ezekiel adding something to her medicine when he thought she was asleep. She replaced the tainted bottles with harmless ones and kept samples as evidence. And the journal? Vivian prompted. Silas flipped through it quickly. Her private observations. Symptoms that worsened after Ezekiel's visits. Names of witnesses who saw him near her medications. His voice caught. She was building a case against her own brother, protecting herself and our child in secret. Why didn't she tell you? Vivian asked. She was going to, Silas replied, indicating the final paragraph of the letter. After the surgery, she didn't want to distract me before the operation. The pain in his voice was raw, freshly awakened. She never got the chance. Sheriff Tanner read through the letter again, his expression hardening. This is evidence of attempted murder, at the very least. An actual murder, if what I suspect is true, Silas added grimly. After Elizabeth died, Ezekiel used his influence to push for malpractice charges against me. He needed a scapegoat to cover his own crimes. The distant sound of approaching horses drifted up from the valley road, a stark reminder of their immediate danger. They're coming, Tanner said, handing the letter back to Silas. What do you want to do? A transformation seemed to come over Silas, the weariness of guilt giving way to the determination of a man who finally glimpsed a path to justice. We face them, he said firmly, with the truth. He turned to Vivian, his expression softening. Take Emma inside. She shouldn't witness what's coming. Vivian nodded, understanding the wisdom of shielding her daughter from the confrontation. Come, sweetheart, she said, guiding Emma toward the door. Let's go make some tea for our visitors. Is Dr. Sam going to be all right? Emma asked, glancing back at Silas with concern. Yes, Vivian assured her, surprising herself with the conviction in her voice. I believe he is. As they disappeared inside, Silas tucked Elizabeth's journal and letter into his pocket, then squared his shoulders to face whatever was coming. I never took you for the noble stand type, Tanner remarked, moving to stand beside him at the top of the porch steps. Neither did I, Silas admitted, but I'm tired of shadows and half-truths. It's time to end this. The riders emerged from the tree line at the edge of the property. Ezekiel Montgomery leading the procession on his black stallion, followed by a distinguished-looking gentleman who could only be Dr. Richardson, and 2 deputies bringing up the rear. They approached with the deliberate pace of men confident in their purpose and authority. Ezekiel reined his horse to a stop at the foot of the porch steps, a triumphant smile playing at the corners of his mouth. Dr. Samuel Hayward, he announced formally, your deception ends today. Silas regarded him coolly. Does it, Ezekiel, or does yours? The banker's smile faltered slightly. I've brought Dr. Richardson from Boston Medical Society. He can confirm that you have no right to practice medicine, let alone experiment on an innocent child. The older gentleman beside Ezekiel cleared his throat, clearly uncomfortable with the personal animosity on display. Dr. Hayward, he began formally, I regret that. Before you continue, Silas interrupted, you should know that I've just discovered evidence that may change your perspective on this situation. He withdrew Elizabeth's journal from his pocket. This journal belonged to Elizabeth Montgomery Hayward. It details how her brother was systematically poisoning her before her death. Richardson's bushy eyebrows shot up. What? That's preposterous. Is it? Sheriff Tanner interjected. I've read the evidence myself. Mrs. Hayward documented everything. Times, dates, symptoms that corresponded with her brother's visits. Ezekiel's face darkened. This is absurd. You're clutching at straws, Hayward. Am I? Silas countered, descending the porch steps to stand eye to eye with his former brother-in-law. Elizabeth knew what you were doing, Ezekiel. She kept samples of the tainted medicine. She named witnesses who saw you tampering with her medications. For the first time, uncertainty flickered in Ezekiel's eyes. You're bluffing. Sheriff, Silas said, not breaking eye contact with Ezekiel. Perhaps you'd be good enough to read Elizabeth's final letter aloud, for the benefit of our visitors. As Tanner began reading, the color drained from Ezekiel's face. Dr. Richardson listened with growing horror, while the deputies exchanged uneasy glances. If anything happens to me during the operation, Tanner read the final paragraph, please know it was not Samuel's fault. My brother has been slowly killing me, and I fear he will find a way to blame my husband. The evidence is all here. Please see that justice is done. All my love, Elizabeth. A heavy silence fell over the assembled men. Dr. Richardson stared at Ezekiel, shock and disgust warring on his features. Mr. Montgomery, he said finally, you told me this was a simple case of a disgraced doctor practicing illegally. Don't be fooled, Ezekiel snapped, desperation edging into his voice. They've obviously fabricated this so-called evidence. Elizabeth would never betray you. Silas finished for him. You're right. Even at the end, she protected you, kept her suspicions secret to avoid distracting me before the operation. His voice grew hard. You used her love and loyalty against her, Ezekiel. You poisoned your own sister because you couldn't bear to see her happy without your control. That's a lie, Ezekiel shouted, but the quaver in his voice betrayed him. Is it? Silas pressed. Just as it's a lie that I lost my medical license? Just as it's probably a lie that Robert Holloway's death was an accident? At the mention of Robert, one of the deputies shifted uncomfortably. Mr. Montgomery, he said hesitantly, maybe we should— Silence, Ezekiel barked. You're paid to follow orders, not think. Actually, Sheriff Tanner interjected, they're paid to uphold the law, and right now it's looking like you might be on the wrong side of it. Richardson cleared his throat again. I must say, this casts things in a very different light. Hayward was indeed cleared of all charges by the medical board. He left practice voluntarily. He turned to Ezekiel with naked suspicion. You assured me there had been a conviction. Ezekiel's composure cracked further. His hand moved to his coat, where the bulge of a concealed pistol was now visible. This changes nothing, he snarled. Hayward is still practicing without a Wyoming license. The child is still in danger. The only danger to that child, came Vivian's voice from the porch, was you trying to take her away. All eyes turned to find Vivian standing in the doorway, Emma half hidden behind her skirts, watching the confrontation with wide eyes. Mrs. Holloway, De Richardson greeted, tipping his hat. I understand your daughter is Dr. Hayward's patient. He saved her life, Vivian stated firmly. When our local doctor had given up hope, Dr. Hayward developed a treatment that has her improving every day. And do you consent to this treatment? Richardson asked, his professional demeanor reasserting itself. Wholeheartedly, Vivian affirmed, just as my husband sought Dr. Hayward's help before his death. Ezekiel's eyes narrowed at this revelation. Robert contacted Hayward? He wrote to me about Emma's condition, Silas confirmed, shortly before the fire that claimed his life. Understanding dawned on the sheriff's face, the timing of which has always been suspicious, he added pointedly. This is all very convenient, Ezekiel sneered, his hand still hovering near his concealed weapon. A mysterious letter, a hidden journal suddenly discovered. You can't prove any of it. Perhaps not conclusively, Silas conceded. But there are samples of the tainted medicine mentioned in Elizabeth's journal, and I suspect if we examine Robert Holloway's remains, We might find evidence of foul play there as well. The suggestion hung in the air like gunpowder, volatile and dangerous. Ezekiel's face contorted with rage and desperation, the expression of a man seeing his carefully constructed world crumbling around him. With startling speed, he drew his pistol, aiming it directly at Silas. "Enough of this farce," he spat. "You took Elizabeth from me. You won't take my reputation too." The deputies reached for their weapons, but Sheriff Tanner raised a hand to halt them. "Easy now," he said calmly. "Nobody needs to die today, Ezekiel." "You don't understand," Ezekiel replied, his voice cracking. "She was leaving, going to Boston permanently. He was taking her away forever." "She was starting a family," Silas said quietly, "not abandoning you." "She was mine!" Ezekiel shouted, spittle flying from his lips, the pistol trembling in his hand. "My responsibility since our parents died. I protected her, guided her, and she chose you, a nobody with delusions of grandeur." "She loved me," Silas said simply, "and I loved her." "Love," Ezekiel scoffed. "What did you know of love? You killed her with your arrogance." "No, Ezekiel," Silas replied, his voice steady despite the weapon aimed at his heart. "You poisoned her to weaken her heart, knowing the pregnancy would strain it further. You created the very crisis I tried to solve with surgery." "You can't prove that," Ezekiel insisted, but doubt had crept into his voice. "The samples Elizabeth kept might say otherwise," Sheriff Tanner interjected. "And there are other ways of finding truth. People talk, Ezekiel. Servants, maids, stable hands who might have seen things." A wild look entered Ezekiel's eyes. "It doesn't matter. None of it matters. I'll end this here and—" "Stop!" The clear, childish voice cut through the tension like a knife. Emma had stepped out from behind her mother, her small face set in determination. "Emma, go back inside," Vivian urged, trying to pull her daughter back. But Emma shook free, stepping forward with the fearlessness of childhood. "The piano lady says you have to stop now," she declared, looking directly at Ezekiel. Confusion crossed the banker's face. "What nonsense is this?" "Elizabeth," Emma said simply, "your sister. She plays piano in my dreams. She says you have to stop hurting people." The effect on Ezekiel was immediate and profound. The color drained from his face and the pistol dipped slightly. What are you saying?" "She wears a blue dress," Emma continued, moving closer despite Vivian's desperate attempt to reach for her. "And she has a gold eagle pin, like yours. She says you gave it to her when she graduated from music school." Ezekiel staggered as if physically struck. "No one knows that," he whispered. "No one but Elizabeth and me." "She says you weren't always this way," Emma pressed on, now standing directly between Silas and the wavering pistol. "She says you used to read her stories when she was scared, before you got angry all the time." "Emma, please," Vivian begged, her heart in her throat as her daughter stood before an armed and unstable man. But Emma seemed oddly unafraid. "The piano lady says you can still choose differently. She forgives you even though you hurt her." Ezekiel's hand was shaking violently now, the pistol wavering between Emma and Silas. "This is a trick," he insisted, but his voice had lost its conviction. "The child couldn't know these things." "Yet she does," Silas said quietly, "just as she knew about the hidden compartment in Elizabeth's box." Something broke in Ezekiel then, some final pillar of denial or self-justification. The pistol clattered to the ground, and he sank to his knees, burying his face in his hands. "I never meant for her to die," he sobbed, his voice muffled. "I just wanted her to be too weak to have the surgery. The doctors in Philadelphia advised against it. They said it was too risky, but Elizabeth wouldn't listen to them. Or to me." His shoulders shook with each ragged breath. "I thought, if the symptoms worsened gradually, she would abandon the idea of surgery. She would stay in Philadelphia, where I could watch over her, where she would need me again. Her husband was taking her away, building a life where I had no place." A haunted look crossed his face. "The foxglove extract was meant to weaken her heart just enough to make the surgery too dangerous to attempt. Every physician would advise against it. Elizabeth would have no choice but to accept their judgment, to rely on traditional treatments, to rely on me. I never thought she would convince Samuel to operate anyway." His voice broke. I never wanted her to die. She was all the family I had left. Sheriff Tanner moved swiftly, kicking the fallen weapon aside and placing a restraining hand on Ezekiel's shoulder. Ezekiel Montgomery, I'm placing you under arrest for the attempted murder of Dr. Samuel Hayward, in pending investigation into the deaths of Elizabeth Hayward and Robert Holloway. As the deputies moved to assist, Ezekiel looked up, his face wet with tears, meeting Silas's gaze. I've hated you for so long, he said hoarsely, blamed you for everything. I know, Silas replied, no triumph in his voice, only a profound weariness. I've blamed myself too. Elizabeth truly loved you, Ezekiel admitted, as the deputies helped him to his feet. I couldn't bear it. As they led him away, Ezekiel paused beside Emma. How, Anna? He asked simply. How could you know those things? Emma shrugged, the innocent gesture at odds with the weight of the moment. I just listen when she plays. The music helps my heart feel better. With that cryptic response, the child turned and ran back to her mother's waiting arms, leaving Ezekiel to be led away, a broken man facing the consequences of his actions at last. Dr. Richardson approached Silas, extending his hand. Dr. Hayward, I owe you an apology. I was misled about the circumstances. Silas accepted the handshake with a nod. You were doing your duty as you understood it. Nevertheless, Richardson continued, I'll be making a full report to the Medical Society clearing your name, and he hesitated. If you're interested, there's a position at Massachusetts General that would benefit from your expertise in cardiac conditions. A flicker of surprise crossed Silas's face. I appreciate the offer, but my place is here now. Richardson nodded, understanding in his eyes. Of course, though Wyoming Territory could use a properly licensed physician. I'd be happy to expedite the paperwork. As the Boston doctor departed to follow the sheriff's party back to town, Silas turned to find Vivian and Emma watching him from the porch. The setting sun bathed them in golden light, creating a tableau that stirred something long dormant in his heart. You were very brave, he told Emma, climbing the steps to kneel before her, but also very foolish to put yourself in danger like that. Emma smiled, unrepentant. The piano lady said it would be okay. Silas glanced at Vivian, who shook her head in bewilderment. I don't understand it either, she admitted, but she's been having these dreams since we arrived. Whatever the explanation, Silas said, rising to his feet, it seems Elizabeth had a hand in bringing justice, even from beyond. Vivian studied his face, noting the subtle change there, as if a burden had been lifted, allowing light to reach places long in shadow. What happens now? It was a simple question that carried layers of meaning. What happened to Ezekiel? To Emma's treatment? To the three of them, brought together by circumstance and tragedy? Silas gazed out over Whisper Valley, his valley, as the first stars appeared in the darkening sky. Now, he said softly, we begin again. The weeks following Ezekiel's arrest brought dramatic changes to Whisper Valley and its inhabitants. The banker's confession, extracted during his initial hearing, sent shockwaves through Valley Ridge. His admission to tampering with Elizabeth's medication, not with the intent to kill, he insisted, but to weaken her enough to prevent the surgery, led to charges that would ensure he spent the remainder of his life in prison. More shocking still was his eventual confession regarding Robert Holloway's death. Though he denied personally setting the fire that claimed Robert's life, he admitted to hiring men to frighten the stubborn rancher into selling his land after discovering the silver deposits. The fire, he claimed, was an accident, meant to damage property, not take life. Whether judge and jury would believe this partial denial remained to be seen. For Vivian, the revelation that Robert had been murdered, even indirectly, reopened wounds she thought had begun to heal. She spent several days in quiet grief, processing this new understanding of her husband's death. Silas respected her need for space, focusing instead on Emma's treatment and the legal matters arising from Ezekiel's arrest. Emma, remarkably, seemed least affected by the turmoil. Her health continued to improve under Silas's care, and her mysterious dreams of the piano lady faded as Ezekiel was brought to justice, leaving behind only a vague memory that she mentioned less and less frequently. On a crisp autumn morning, 3 months after the confrontation in the yard, Vivian found Silas at his desk in the medical room, reviewing Emma's latest test results. How is she? Vivian asked, leaning against the doorframe. Silas looked up. a genuine smile warming his features, something that had become increasingly common as the shadows of the past receded. Remarkably well. The medication is working exactly as I'd hoped. Her heart is strengthening, and the symptoms have decreased significantly. Will she still need the surgery? Eventually, yes, Silas confirmed. But we can wait until she's older and stronger. The risks will be substantially reduced then. Vivian nodded, relief washing through her. That's wonderful news. It is, Silas agreed, setting aside the papers, though it does raise a question about your future plans. The topic had been hovering between them, unaddressed during the tumult of Ezekiel's arrest and the subsequent investigations. With Emma's treatment progressing well and the immediate danger past, the question of what came next could no longer be avoided. Our future plans, Vivian corrected gently. I was hoping we might discuss those together. Something flickered in Silas's gray eyes, hope, perhaps, tempered by caution. You're under no obligation to stay, Vivian. With Ezekiel's assets frozen pending his trial, the bank has been forced to forgive many outstanding loans, including yours. Your land is free and clear. You could rebuild. I could, she acknowledged, but that's not what I want. What do you want? Silas asked, his voice carefully neutral. Vivian entered the room fully now, moving to stand beside his desk. I want Emma to continue receiving the best medical care possible. I want her to grow up in a place where she feels safe and loved. She paused, gathering her courage. And I've come to want something for myself as well. Which is? A partner, Vivian said simply. Someone to share the burden and the woe, someone who understands loss but isn't defined by it. She met his gaze directly. I think you want that too. Silas stood slowly, the careful neutrality in his expression giving way to vulnerable honesty. I never thought I could have that again, or that I deserved it. Elizabeth wouldn't want you to punish yourself forever, Vivian said softly. Neither would Robert want that for me. You're certain? Silas asked. And she knew he wasn't just asking about her feelings, but about the future she was proposing, one they would build together from the ashes of their respective pasts. I am, Vivian affirmed. Emma adores you, and she hesitated, still finding it difficult to articulate the feelings that had grown between them. I've come to care for you, Silas, more than I thought possible. He reached for her hand, his touch gentle but sure. I care for you too, Vivian. You and Emma both. But there's something you should know before we discuss this further. What is it? Richardson's offer, Silas explained. The position at Massachusetts General. I've been considering it. Vivian felt a pang of disappointment. You're leaving Whisper Valley? Not exactly, Silas clarified. They've asked me to establish a research program focused on congenital heart conditions. It would mean dividing my time, perhaps 6 months in Boston, 6 months here. I see, Vivian said, processing this new information. It would be beneficial for Emma's treatment, Silas continued. Access to the latest medical advances, specialists who could assist with her eventual surgery. He paused, studying her reaction. But it would mean changes for all of us. All of us. A hint of uncertainty crossed his features. I had hoped, that is, I wouldn't want to separate you and Emma. If you were amenable, you could both accompany me to Boston for those periods. Vivian couldn't help but smile at his formal phrasing, so characteristic of the man. Are you asking us to come with you, Dr. Hayward? The use of his true name seemed to break through his reserve. I'm asking for more than that, Vivian, he said, his voice deepening with emotion. I'm asking if you could envision a life where we face whatever comes next together. Here, in Boston, wherever Emma's treatment and our work takes us. Our work? Your musical talent shouldn't be wasted, Silas said firmly. Boston has conservatories, teaching positions, performance opportunities. You could reclaim that part of yourself while Emma receives treatment. The thoughtfulness of his proposal, considering not just Emma's needs, but Vivian's long-dormant passions, touched her deeply. You've given this considerable thought. I have, he admitted, though I wasn't certain you would be interested in such an arrangement. Vivian stepped closer, eliminating the careful distance they had maintained these past months. I'm interested in building a future, Silas, with you, whether that's here in Boston or divided between the two. The relief and joy that transformed his features made him look younger, unburdened. With careful deliberation, he raised his hand to cup her cheek. "May I?" he asked, the question encompassing far more than the immediate gesture. "Yes," Vivian whispered, closing her eyes as his lips found hers in a kiss that spoke of new beginnings and second chances, of healing hearts and the promise of tomorrow. From the doorway came a small gasp, followed by a delighted giggle. They broke apart to find Emma watching them, her blue eyes wide with childish glee. "Does this mean Dr. Sam is going to be my new papa?" she asked bluntly. Vivian felt heat rise to her cheeks, but Silas surprised her by kneeling to address Emma directly. "That would be entirely up to you and your mother, Emma," he said seriously. "But I would consider it the greatest honor of my life if someday you might think of me that way." Emma considered this with the solemn deliberation of childhood, then nodded decisively. "I think I'd like that. And I think Papa would too. He told me to take care of Mama, but it's hard work by myself." Vivian knelt beside Silas, drawing Emma into an embrace. "When did your father tell you that, sweetheart?" "In my dream," Emma replied matter-of-factly. "He was with the piano lady. They said they're happy we found Dr. Sam." Vivian and Silas exchanged a look over Emma's head, a mix of wonder, bewilderment, and perhaps a touch of the inexplicable mystery that had brought them together. "Well," Silas said finally, including Emma in the circle of his arm so that the three of them knelt together in a close embrace, "I'm very happy we found each other too." As they held each other in the gentle morning light filtering through the windows of what had once been a room of science and grief, now transformed into a place of healing and hope, Vivian felt a sense of rightness settle over her. The past would always be with them, its echoes resonating through their lives like music through a valley. But those echoes need not define their future. Outside, the Wyoming wind whispered through the pines, carrying the promise of seasons to come. Inside, in this moment of connection, three hearts beat in rhythm, damaged perhaps, but healing, strengthening, finding in each other the courage to begin again. In the months and years that followed, that courage would be tested and strengthened. The seasons turned, summer heat giving way to autumn gold, winter snow melting into spring renewal, as Whisper Valley witnessed the gradual transformation of three wounded souls into a family. Silas and Vivian were married beneath the old cottonwood tree the following spring, Emma proudly carrying a basket of wildflowers as she led the procession. Ezekiel's trial came and went. Justice finally served for both Elizabeth and Robert. The silver mine on Vivian's former property began in operation under their careful oversight, bringing prosperity they could once only have dreamed of. Through it all, the piano music continued, a thread connecting past and present, loss and renewal, sorrow and joy, an echo that would resonate through their lives for years to come. Autumn 1897, 10 years since that pivotal morning in Silas's medical room. The aspen leaves had turned golden once more, painting the Wyoming hillsides in shades of amber and bronze, as they had for countless seasons before. But much else had changed in the decade that had passed. A carriage wound its way up the now widened road to Whisper Valley, carrying a family returning from their biannual stay in Boston. The valley itself had transformed. What was once a solitary ranch had grown into a small but thriving community. New buildings dotted the landscape, a proper medical clinic where Silas Hayward, now fully licensed in Wyoming territory, treated patients from across the region, comfortable homes for the staff who helped run the expanding ranch operations, and a small schoolhouse where Vivian taught music 3 days a week when they were in residence. The Whisper Valley Silver Company, founded with capital from the mine on Vivian's former property, had brought prosperity not only to the Hayward family, but to Valley Ridge itself, funding improvements throughout the town that had once turned its back on a desperate mother and child. The rhythms of their lives had found a harmonious balance between East and West. 6 months in Boston for Silas's research and Emma's advanced education. 6 months in the Valley they all considered home. Holloway Hayward, now 15, pressed her face to the carriage window as their home came into view, her golden curls catching the late afternoon sunlight. "I can see Ranger's puppies in the yard," she exclaimed, referring to the descendants of the faithful dog who had passed peacefully 3 years prior. "And look, Uncle Jonathan's wagon is here." Vivian smiled at her daughter's excitement. "I told you he'd arrive before us, He's probably been regaling your brothers with wild stories from his newspaper days. Beside her, Silas adjusted the sleeping toddler on his lap. 3-year-old Sarah, named for Vivian's mother. Their son Thomas, age 6, had dozed off against his father's shoulder, exhausted from the long journey from Boston. The past decade had been kind to them all. Emma's health had improved dramatically following her successful heart surgery at Massachusetts General when she was 10. She now showed every sign of following in her adoptive father's footsteps. Her keen mind and natural compassion making her a promising candidate for medical school in a few years' time. Silas himself had flourished, dividing his time between his research in Boston and his practice in Wyoming. The burden of guilt he had carried for so long had gradually lightened, replaced by the purpose he found in healing others and the joy he discovered in family life. Vivian had reclaimed her musical talents, teaching piano in both locations and occasionally performing with the Boston Philharmonic during their Eastern sojourns. The proceeds from the silver mine discovered on her former property, now ethically operated by a company in which they held controlling interest, had provided financial security that allowed them to focus on their respective passions. As the carriage pulled into the yard, Jonathan Holloway emerged from the main house, followed by 2 energetic boys, Thomas and his cousin Benjamin, Jonathan's son from his marriage to a fellow journalist in Denver. "Welcome home, travelers," Jonathan called, helping the driver with their luggage as Silas carefully handed down the sleeping children to Vivian. Amidst the chaos of homecoming, excited children, barking dogs, the unpacking of trunks, and settling of the household, Vivian found a moment of quiet on the front porch as dusk painted the valley in hues of gold and purple. Silas joined her, 2 cups of coffee in hand. "It's good to be back," he said, passing her one of the cups. "It always is," Vivian agreed, leaning against him as they surveyed their domain. "Though I enjoy Boston too." "A perfect balance," Silas mused, "the best of both worlds." From inside came the sound of Emma playing the piano, Elizabeth's piano, her technique now refined by years of proper instruction. The melody drifted through the open windows, filling the valley with music as the evening stars began to appear. "She plays beautifully," Vivian said softly. "Elizabeth would be proud." Silas nodded, a peaceful acceptance in his expression that had taken years to achieve. "I think she is." They had never fully understood Emma's dreams of the piano lady, or how she had known details about Elizabeth that no one could have told her. The dreams had faded as she grew older, leaving behind only a special affinity for the instrument that had once been Elizabeth's pride and joy. "Do you ever wonder," Vivian asked, not needing to specify what she meant, "about the dreams, about how Emma knew those things?" Silas considered the question. "I used to obsess over it, searching for rational explanations. Now I'm content to accept that some mysteries aren't meant to be solved." "Very unscientific of you, Dr. Hayward," Vivian teased gently. Silas smiled, the expression coming easily now after years of happiness. "Perhaps, or perhaps there are forms of knowledge beyond what science can measure." Inside, Emma's playing shifted to a nocturne, the same piece Vivian had played the night she and Silas first truly spoke to each other when he had shared the story of Elizabeth's death. "She's never heard me play that piece," Vivian said quietly. "No," Silas agreed. "She hasn't." They listened in companionable silence as the music washed over them, carrying echoes of the past and present intertwined. Whatever forces had brought them together, chance, fate, or something less easily defined, had led to this moment of contentment, this family forged from loss and love, this home built on the foundation of second chances. As night settled fully over Whisper Valley, Emma's music continued, carried by the gentle Wyoming breeze across the land they had come to cherish. In its notes were echoes of all they had endured and overcome, echoes that would continue to resonate through generations to come, a lasting testament to hearts that had been broken but found the courage to love again. In Boston and Valley Ridge, in moments of joy and sorrow, in the legacy they would leave through their work and their children, these echoes would remain, a reminder that even the deepest wounds could heal, that forgiveness was possible, and that love, once given the chance to take root, could flourish in even the most unlikely soil. As the final notes of Emma's playing faded into the night, Silas took Vivian's hand in his, their fingers intertwining with the ease of long practice and abiding affection. No words were needed between them now, just the shared understanding of two people who had journeyed through darkness and emerged together into light. Above them, stars scattered across the Wyoming sky like diamonds on velvet, bearing witness to the peace that had finally come to Whisper Valley and to the hearts that called it home.